Good afternoon and welcome back to Fight Sports Uncovered. Yes, I'm your host, Mark Joubert, and we continue our Women's Month expose. And you've heard it from me before, Women's Month, why only a 12th of the year dedicated to what women are doing in sport? Well, it's something that big media always seems to focus on. But we, as you know, continue to talk about women, talk about any person that is adding value, that is bringing positivity to sport. And today's no exception. It's a first for boxing, and it's a first for me as well. We're sitting back here in Pretoria at BSA's offices, and my guest today is none other than the new Interim CEO of Boxing South Africa, Cindy Nkomo. Cindy, welcome to Fight Sports Uncovered, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for the opportunity.
First for boxing in South Africa, you are the first woman in the history of the sport to sit at the top of this, let's call it this pile of boxes, arguably the biggest boxing organization on the African continent. First feel, first couple of days, first couple of weeks in the job. I mean, you've been in the sport for a long time. You've been in the board, in this board environment for a long time, but sitting at the top of the pile, how does it make you feel?
Just from your intro, I just got nervous, as if it's like just like that first day of appointment. I'm obviously happy. Strangely enough, I'm not intimidated. I'm not nervous. And I guess it's because I've been, with the organization for 3 years and 8 months. So I'm home. The only thing that has changed is that I have an additional hat. But I must say that as much as I am the first woman to assume, even at interim arrangement, the CEO position, I've had women who have been in the sport and represented the sport at board level. When I joined BSA, we had our chairperson, Mendambi Ravele, and unfortunately she left at the time that I was just settling in, because that term ended in late 2017. But the current board, we also have 2 females, Ms. Sandile Kabini and Ms. Letlogonolo Nokhe Tungamirai. So I've been fortunate to actually have those women around me and see how they work and see their presence in the sport. So I guess it became an easy thing for me to do, and probably that's why I'm not nervous or worried at all, because I've seen other women do it. But in short, it's an honor for me to serve boxing during this time, and let's see how it goes.
Many young female boxers are obviously super excited to see a woman at the helm. I mean, for many of them complaining, concerned, worried about the state of female boxing in this country. And I mean, us talking just before this discussion, female boxing in this country is a problematic space, and clearly a space for concern. For you now sitting at the helm, I'm kind of almost certain that it is one of the big priorities for you?
Most definitely, but not because I am female. Yes, that assists a little bit, because obviously I'm going to champion for that. But because we as women are in sport, and we should not, view us as a secondary priority. So my focus will purely be because there's our act provides for women participation, and in that I'm accountable to make sure that they have their space in boxing, they are able to get into the ring, and they're not treated differently as because they're women. But I think also my priority is the reality is that we don't have as many women that participate in the sport, in the ring, although we license around 100, on average 100 a year, and out of these about 44 will be your boxers. In their 40s will be your boxers, and then we have other categories, promoters, trainers and managers, and it's encouraging actually to see that you are starting to get females into other areas that were not there training. So for me, my priority really is from the fact that this is our space. We are not here because, we just needed to fill in a certain quota. No, we have a right to be here. And it has been evident in that we have produced champions. We have promoters who are really doing great. And we'll continue giving that support. Ms. Gabini, as the chairperson of the Women in Boxing program and committee, is also very passionate. But we needed to get a plan first. What do we do? Because you get this influx of women, but if you don't have a plan of what to do with them, you sort of it sort of disappears. So we have done that. We have put a plan together. Unfortunately, this year, when we had grand plans beyond just the Women's Month, we were then interrupted by COVID. But it's one of those things that are high in my priorities, and we'll definitely make sure that we change the status quo and actually shift this narrative that because it's Women's Month we must give focus to women. No, any other month we are just as capable. And we're just hoping that with the easing of restrictions, we'll get to a point whereby we do something with women. We still have March, which has an International Women's Day, and we'll see if we can't do anything. But definitely, before the end of this financial year, we would give recognition and also just make sure that we consult and come up with a feasible plan, but a plan that has continuity for our female licensees.
Many detractors talking about the fact that there is now a woman sitting at the top of the pile here in boxing in South Africa, a woman that hasn't thrown a punch in anger in a ring. Many talking about the fact that this is a male-dominated sport, historically speaking. Why? How? What value could having a woman at the top of the boxing pile here in South Africa have for the future development, growth of the sport?
So maybe the first thing is that I'm hoping that my appointment in the interim CEO position will just in a simple way give confidence to any woman, to any girl child outside that thinks that they cannot do something for whatever reason. And most of the reasons because society has labeled, we understand that the most active gender in sport is men, especially in boxing. But there's no way where it says, a woman can't, whether in administration, whether in activity. So for me, I would want to use this appointment as such confirmation that we women can actually get into, any environment and succeed and actually add value. But I also would want to change the narrative that just because you have never boxed, just because you have never been a promoter, you can't contribute to boxing. I think that's totally flawed because I always say that the principles of management are the same in any industry. What changes is what you're selling. So my administration of boxing is not going to be any different from any organization. But what's important is that while I'm sitting here, is that I understand what is happening in the ring and learn the sport, and which is what I have done. But I also think we need to be kind to people in general because what you know today, you never knew at some point. And I always encourage people to say, the argument to say, but you can't do this because you don't know. At some point, you didn't know boxing. You didn't know anything about boxing, but you were allowed a space to learn. Give me that space and judge me on how fast I learn or what is my, passion. Am I passionate enough to learn as fast as, and obviously with time, it's been 3 years, 8 months. And I can definitely say that I've shaken things up. We've done a lot of work, changes, and therefore I don't think I should account to anybody about the fact that I've never thrown in a punch. I don't need to. I just need to make sure that I know the administration of boxing.
Your announcement, the announcement that you were going to be taking over as interim CEO, that means you wear two hats, like you alluded to earlier. You're still the director of operations for boxing, and now you've got to wear this hat of interim CEO. wearing both of those hats, coming out of COVID into lockdown level 2, return to ring policies, gyms opening, fitness centers opening. Very briefly, the state of boxing in South Africa right now as we sit here in your office.
Very promising. Actually, we should be seeing our first fight as early as October. With the move to level 2, we've been able to open gyms, which takes out a bit of frustration for our boxers. Then they can go back to gym with their trainers. On the administrative side, we've submitted our application for the resumption of events, and obviously you need to give details of how you're going to phase that out. We've done that, and we are hopeful that we're going to get a go-ahead. We've got about 4 promoters who are already ready to go. And we're just hoping that with that, yes, everybody is going to be on board, put in the measures that we need to put in to ensure a safe environment when we return. And we're ready to go. So more than anything, even if tomorrow they say we must host a tournament, I'm sure we can put something together.
Putting together a tournament, that's one thing. Getting a promoter to find a venue, to get a sponsor, to get fighters ready. But having ready fighters is a very, very different thing. And up until the announcement by the president, athletes weren't really allowed to spar. They weren't really allowed to really get punched in the face, if I can use that term. That takes a while to get used to it again, bearing in mind that for the last 4 months, athletes haven't had that experience, or many shouldn't have had that experience based on regulations. Logic says to me that we need at least 6 to 8 weeks to allow those athletes to get ring ready, and hope that the ring rust that they've experienced over the last short period of time is going to be as minimal as possible.
Sure. So the 6 weeks we've taken into consideration. That's why our plans with the promoters is around October. But we must also remember that these are professional athletes. So as much as they were not able to spar, which is what gets them fit for the fight, they had been training, yes. So they have been running strength training, but now they're going to use this time with the gyms open now to obviously be specific and get into the ring with their trainers. So we are confident that they will be ready at that time. But we've also just not left it to them. We are signing obviously agreements with the boxers that they will not get into the ring because obviously they just want to get paid because it's a safety issue. But with the plans that are in place and the type of bouts that we have, we are confident in that it will not be a forced move, and that they understand that this a couple of weeks are used to just concentrate on the fight, and the resources are there, the plans are there, and we've incorporated them in our submission to the minister. I know it's been a trying time for them. But I can assure you that the few that I've seen, which will be fighting soon, are quite fit and just need a little bit of polishing to just get them ready for the ring.
Absolutely fantastic news coming from Interim CEO Cindy Nkomo, giving us all the inside information. And it's just been a couple of weeks since she was announced in this new capacity, in her new role, in a new dual role, because as you heard earlier, she needs to fulfill the role of Director of Operations as well. And that's going to be a tough ask for her when these first events kick off. We're going to carry on talking to her, delve a little bit deeper when we come back. Don't go away.
Get faith-inspiring testimonies for living in divine health from the Healing School magazine. It's free of charge and easy to download. Just log on to www.enterthehealingschool.org/magazine. Fill in your name and email address. Download now.
Welcome back to Fight Sports Uncovered. And if you've been watching the first half of the show, you'll know that we're in conversation this Women's Month with the new Interim CEO of Boxing South Africa, Cindy Nkomo. And you'll have heard that plans are well underway to get those fighters, to get those athletes making money, first of all, back in the ring fighting, and hopefully get promoters making money, which is the first step towards getting fans back ringside to watch their favorite fighters throw down and hopefully get some wins under their belt. Cindy, looking at a lot of the communication that BSA has put out over the last, let's call it 2-3 weeks, one of those communication pieces spoke a lot about prioritization and what the priorities are going to be like going forward. And that was very much linked to the announcement of the resignation of Mr. Lejaka, you coming on board, and the plans post-COVID. Now, looking at some of those priorities, putting you on the spot, for you right now in that dual role of Director of Operations and Interim CEO, top 5 priorities, what are they for boxing as they stand today?
I think always, consistently, our priority is to ensure the proper governance of the institution. And that means obviously aligning with the regulatory framework, the Boxing Act and boxing regulation. So in all that we do, that's what anchors us as an organization. We have been doing some work which comes from the Indaba Convention in 2013. This is where most of the resolutions were made, with licensees obviously contributing and asking for certain things to be put in place. One is obviously the regulations and the act to ensure that we operate consistently within that framework. The training of our ring officials was also part of that, which is also a priority for us right now, because our last training was in 2016.
Wow.
And we need to then roll that out and then come up with a plan on how regular would we want these trainings to happen. I mean, if you take other industries where they, for instance, our national carrier, they would have a refresher course every other 2 years. Is it something that we can do? We certainly have to look into that. The Women in Boxing program is one of our priorities, because we need to get a plan as to how do we ensure that we just don't do an intake of females within the sport and leave them hanging, and where they get frustrated and obviously leave the sport. We have been working on amending the regulations because that's the easiest part to do from the Act, because obviously the Act is more involved, and obviously because there is talks of the Combat Sports Bill.
Yes.
The immediate thing that we can do is obviously amending the regulations. I'm glad to say that that draft is ready. So the next phase is to be in consultation with the boxing community, especially our promoters, because there's a lot of things that obviously affect them, and as well as the boxers. So we are hoping that by the end of the financial year, in March next year, that sitting would have taken place. The biggest thing that I know that our licenses are waiting for is the boxing convention. Yeah. We were supposed to have the boxing convention in June this year. COVID-19 obviously disturbed those plans. We are hoping that before the end of the financial year, we will have that. And the reason why it's important is that, you know, as leadership, you have ideas on what to do, what are the plans, but sometimes those ideas may not be aligned to the people that you are serving. And I mean, it has been a number of years. The last convention was in 2013. 7 years later, nothing has happened in between. We did have a promoters workshop in 2017, but that's just promoters. How do we then bring in everybody so that, yeah. Because you know, as much as we have a regulatory framework, we know what to do, it's always a great idea just to take the time out to align with the licensees, and also bring them into confidence as to why you're doing certain things, because we can't, I mean, it's not a secret that there has been a bit of administrative gap, and how do you then close that gap? And you've got to have your licensees to buy into the plans, and then the plans that you then carry forward are not only your plans, but they incorporate the ideas, the desires, and the plans of the licenses. So if we can get all those things in place, especially the boxing convention, I think we'll be good to start the next financial year great. The boxing awards.
I was just going to ask you, boxing awards.
Yeah, so the boxing awards are a bit of a challenge, because we have to balance, obviously, two things. We have to balance the fact that there's COVID-19. But we also have to balance, honestly, the priority. You know, do you want to have this grand event at a time where, you know, our licensees would need support? You know, how do you help them, but also have something that also just makes them feel good. So we are still going to have the Boxing Awards. What we are left with is just to obviously decide on how we're going to do that, because it's also important that during this time there's something that's a feel good for licenses, especially the boxers. This is something that confirms to them, even at nomination level, that they're actually doing great.
An important question for me, important question I asked Mr. Lejaka when we last spoke, was the fact that BSA is the organization that looks after professional boxing in this country. But your pipeline into professional boxing is the amateur ranks. Sanabo is, let's call it, in a state of disrepair, if I may use that term. The Olympics has moved out a year. We have got qualifications to take place for the Olympics for that young and up-and-coming set, our top amateurs. That is the next level that's going to come in to be looked after by BSA. Where are we from a boxing community to complete that continuum of amateur into professional? I know it's difficult from a professional body governed by an act where amateur should not have any sort of government interference. How is Boxing South Africa under your stewardship going to cross that bridge?
So very interesting. I think a lot of people don't know that the Act actually provides for a relationship with amateur boxing. That's the first one. Even the appointment of the board, the Act does say that one of the one board member or one of the board members must at least have experience in women boxing as well as amateur boxing. So it is something, although we are not directly involved, it is a relationship that we would want to have. Currently, when we do what we call our sparring, where amateur boxers then graduate to professional, it has been a bit, there has not been a link and a relationship, an active relationship between amateur boxing, which is now actually called open boxing, and professional boxing. But we have started having a conversation. Just before the lockdown in March, I think it was the 24th of March, we actually had a meeting with the interim structure of Sanabo, and we are continuing with that relationship. It is one of the resolutions from the 2013 Indaba, and we are sort of getting involved because we understand that they are the feeder to professional boxing. But also there are conversations that we are having which are also very key in that when you talk of graduation from amateur boxing to professional, you are looking at stars as well. So the conversation there is, how do we make sure that we don't drain open boxing of the talent that is ready to represent the country, because there's this chase of professional boxing. Obviously looking at to not denying your young boxers the opportunity to come into professional boxing. So those are continuing a conversation, and I'm hopeful that before the end of the year we'll definitely have something in place.
It's an interesting conversation I've had with a couple of trainers that it just seems as though the mindset here in South Africa, particularly with regards to promotion owners and trainers, is that I want to train a world champion. But I very rarely see and hear of a trainer saying, I can't wait to train an Olympic gold medalist. And it seems as though that component, the amateur set of boxing, as we know, in effect, doesn't exist. White-collar boxing seems to have taken its role. And I don't seem to get the sense from the training community that there's this massive drive to be the trainer that has trained an Olympic gold medalist. And surely for you, in terms of the entire boxing continuum, having trainers that are training Olympic medalists is an absolute necessity for boxing to literally flourish in this country that has so much natural talent.
You're quite right, and I'll just mention one boxer. Your Thulani Mbenge. They've represented the country, and maybe the question we should be asking is, why is that? Is it because we've lost confidence in actually representing the country and wearing the national colors? Or is there something more enticing in professional sport, and what is it? And how do we then close that gap? Because it's very important to also have a rounded athlete who has gone through the pipeline, because sometimes I just feel that some of these athletes are just rushed, and they get into this environment from a very high and active amateur activities to a space where, as a professional boxer, obviously, and as a champion, you can't be active 6 times in a year, you know? And how do we then close the gap? And I also just think that if we have those conversations and ask the right questions, we'll get to a point whereby we say, okay, this is what's attracted them to professional boxing, and then close that gap. But it's certainly something that, you know, undesirable, because once you get into professional boxing, it seems like there's a wall. Yes. Where you can't move in, and you then start chasing belts. But I also think instilling the pride of being a representative of the country is very, very important. Does it take us to go out and do educational workshops? Definitely. Does it also mean that we must have this conversation with the trainers, with the managers of these boxers, and come up with a plan of each boxer, especially the stars that are coming out of those. So for me, I'm very happy that we have started the conversation with Sanabo, because once we also understand what their plans are, it will inform our sparring sessions, and we'll have that linkage where there is no gap in terms of Sanabo and BSA, especially when we have plans to actually get some boxers into the Olympics.
Other good news seen in terms of communication coming out of BSA, we're looking at the announcement that licensing for the 2021 period has commenced, and also that non-SA citizens, the registration of those athletes and also promoters is now open. I mean, that's been a big space for boxing, the non-South African citizen. We have a number of big names fighting out of South Africa that are not citizens, and they've essentially been hamstrung by the fact that they haven't really been able to register properly.
So the concession for non-SA citizens to take up a license was informed by a lot of things, and one of them is that you can't ignore that globally, you know, we have global citizens, and to ignore a talent that has come from amateur and represented their country in Olympics, just not in our South African colors, and then has made the transition to professional. And all of that has happened in South Africa, and you can't find a way to accommodate them, would really be a bit of injustice. Yes, we are not licensing them as South African citizens, but what we are doing is that we are just recognizing that they are active in the country, they have the right paperwork with them, and that they don't need to go through all the red tapes that they normally would go through. But an honest conversation also is that, you know, sometimes when you put too much red tape and you can't qualify it, you then open up yourself for other things that you don't want. We wouldn't want any boxer who feels that you know, they want to participate in the sport in the country, and because they are foreign national, they can't. Then they start getting into other things like fraudulent documentation. Yeah. How do we control that space? Because whether they're South Africans or not, we are accountable to them when they get into the ring, and we just had to look at how we assist them to be able to just focus on the boxing without really worrying about them being a non-SA citizens. And it has worked out very well, and I know it is appreciated. And obviously with us moving online with the licensing, we have requested that for now we just administer them a little bit differently, but they are licensed by BSA.
Cindy, so much good news coming out of what boxing, the progression, the goals, the targets, what it seems that you guys have in place for coming out of COVID, hopefully getting close to lockdown level 1, Women in Boxing program. First events back, you say, potentially for this year before the year closes out. I can't wait. This is probably the start of a number of conversations with you in terms of how boxing is going to change under the stewardship of a woman. I can't wait to see. Can't wait to see some of the things that you're talking about here roll out into the sport itself, see the development aspects sort of move to the sort of next level. Really, really excited for the future. Wish you all the best of luck for wearing those two hats I think it's going to be a challenge as these 4 events roll out later this year. But we're going to be standing by, we're going to be watching, and we're going to be there to ask you any questions that pop into our head as we go.
And I'll be available to answer. My door is always open. I'm very passionate about the sport of boxing, by the way. And for me, it's not a job. It's really doing something that you love. And I've always said that I'm one person that gets up in the morning on a Monday morning, and everybody saying it's a blue Monday, and I'm like, I can't wait to get to the office. And once that feeling, is not longer there, it will be time for me. But that's a long way to go. And thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to our further engagements in the future.
Well, there you have it. No Blue Mondays for the Interim CEO of Boxing South Africa. Thanks so much for watching Fight Sports Uncovered. Yeah, we're uncovering quite a lot. Until next week, protect yourselves at all times. We're out.